odd careers ended up writing poetry. Science background, hotel background. But we're going to go into this a little bit and how we ended up doing that. We're starting off with a quote from Robert Frost, which my favorite poet. Poetry is when an emotion has found its thought and the thought has found words. And I always felt that was a great, fantastic, short way to describe poetry. So we'll start with that. And these are 6 signs that you might be a poet. The first one that Cheryl mentioned, you have an unnatural desire to end sentences in rhyme.
You have contractions that don't exist in normal speech.
You break up your sentences in odd places.
Your muse tends to only show up when the weather is moody.
Your library consists of the works of Frost, Rothke, Barrie, Oliver, Eliot, etc.
Your best friend is someone named Roger.
Does anybody know our best friend? Roger?
Yes.
Hopefully this will show up on the screen well enough. I'm going to read through a little bit. These are the different types of poetry styles that are out there. The first one being epic, long, sweeping poems. If you've ever read the Iliad, that's an epic poem. Ballads, story-driven poem, often structured in 4-line stanzas with an ABCD rhyming scheme. Sonnets, Shakespeare was big on sonnets. A 14-line poem featuring specific rhyme scheme, and a volta, a dramatic shift in the argument or the thought. Ode, one of my favorites. I tend to write more in the style of odes. A celebratory or reflective poem dedicated to a specific subject, person, or element of the natural world. Elegies, a solemn, melancholic type poem. I have one of those. Haiku, the traditional Japanese poetic form. That is a very challenging style of poetry to write because it is very specific. 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. And that is a very compact form to get a poem into. Limerick, lighthearted, humorous 5-line poem with an AABBA scheme. Villanelle is a highly structured 19-line poem featuring 2 repeating rhymes and 2 refrains, building a complex, obsessive rhythm. So complex I've not tried one yet. Free verse, which is the style that Art tends to write in more often. Poetry that completely disregards traditional rules of meter, rhythm, or rhyme, allowing for natural speech patterns and emotional flow. If you go out now and look on Facebook pages, some of the poetry pages out there, a lot of the poetry is free verse now versus traditional. Concrete poetry, also known as visual poetry. These are poems where the physical arrangement of the words and letters on the page form a specific shape. So picture a poem of a tree that actually looked like that on the page. And then acrostic, which I think Danita did a little exercise with us when she was doing her thing on poetry. It's a poem where the first letters of each line spell out a word or phrase when read vertically. And I've tried a couple of those too. They're kind of cool. And then yours, I'm going to get your.
Okay, tricks of the trade. I do primarily free verse, and it's a deliberate abuse of many of the conventional uses of language, and so it's a little different. David will read some of these later. It emphasizes some of the meter and rhyme, which is very valuable in most poetry. Mine rhymes once in a while by accident. So I'm going to talk a little bit about meter and rhythm, because that's something which goes, whether there's rhyming or not, You need to kind of get into the flow of the thing, and you follow the words through some sort of a wave, either a wave or a linear step function. You're arranging your language in a way that takes advantage of the metering. Now I like to use fresh images. If there's a tree involved, I'm going to name that kind of tree, for example, or something unique about that particular tree. So I'm trying to use things that are fresher rather than kind of recast similar use words. Story, outline, and hook. Many of my poems, for example, contain something you go all the way through the poem, and at the end, you suddenly make the connection, and it makes sense to you. And I'll give you an example of that a little bit later. Punctuation and enjambment. Here's an example. Wholly Intact or in Fragments is a long poem. It's almost an elegy because it's 25 pages. If you want to get that abuse, it's found in Logjam. It's very experimental, and it emphasizes the use of language and punctuation in strange ways. Now, I've got in red here, indicating where some of the jumps are, and talk a little bit about this one so you can sort of see the pattern that happens. And this is taken out of the middle of the poem. Why the interlocutor lenses don't work both far and near is beyond me. I'll come back to that in a minute. We got red, what's important about it. But let's get back to today. Starting now, it's roaring towards spring. The earth wobbling a little as it should and tilting a little less each day as it should, relative to its axis precessing in orbit, bringing appearance of longer days, warm sense of wonder pending, crocus maybe. So, this is pretty odd use. You know, there's several semicolons in a row, or colons in a row in here. Today, starting now, it's roaring, colon, colon, colon. Why that? You capture individual words and put some value and emphasis on individual words. And interlocular lenses don't work both far and near is beyond me. What I'm doing in here is getting something very close and personal. Later, we get down to the next stanza in here, we're dealing with something much larger. So deliberate transition from small to large. If you just read through the thing, it makes no sense at first. But there is a reason for this way that they're done that way. The appearance of longer days, warmth, sense of wonder pending. We're moving here from something concrete, the earth wobbling a little bit, to something which is maybe its appearance. We're not sure about that thing, but it's longer, warmth, sense of wonder pending. Crocus, maybe. So it's an example of non-rhyme poem here. It takes a big advantage of the punctuation and enjambment. Punctuation, that's pretty obvious. No periods in here. Enjambment, anybody know what that term means? Sure. It's when you take a line and break it someplace before the end of a sentence. And the emphasis is on a word that's left on the line. At the end of that line, that word gets extra special attention, carries more weight. So enjambment is a very important trick for the trade here to use. Assonance and sibilance. When words sound like Sally said seashells, you have to repeat the sounds. You can do it with S's or any other letter, and those kind of emphasize flow of it's a component of the free verse book writing. Wordplay. I like to use words sometimes in ways that they're not intended to be used, and sometimes I'll make up the word and put it in there just for the heck of it, and let's see if the reader catches it. Again, so it just kind of keeps it interesting. And rhyme, yes, like David said, it's important, but sometimes I use it. That's all I'm going to say about that one, I think.
If you ever want to explore a little more free verse, one of our poet laureates, Billy Collins, did most of his poetry in free verse, and look up some of his work. It's interesting, very unique, not something that I would ever consider I'm skilled at. So about me, I spent 45 years in hotel management. Owned a lake resort up in Minnesota for about 10 years, but everything was pretty much hospitality. The way that I ended up getting into poetry is back when I was a teenager, I had a couple buddies who had a garage band, and they kind of created their own music, but they needed lyrics for their music. And so I started doing lyrics for them. They were not successful, so therefore neither was I. But I always loved that. And then, you know, in school you get exposed to poetry, and definitely into college. And I fell in love with Robert Frost and his poetry, but, you know, some of the other writings that I really enjoy. Thoreau, Margaret Atwood, Joyce Kilmer, Mary Oliver, Wendell Berry. That's a small list of a great list of poets that I've read and followed. I've had one poem specifically I sent out in a contest just to see how it would do. There's a group in Britain called the Dark Poets Club, and they run contests occasionally, and so they had one where they wanted a compact poem, dark in nature, and I sent the poem out. Oh, it had to be less than 50 words. Now, I don't typically write, if you've read my stuff, I don't typically write dark poetry, but I just happened to have written one. And I went back, I said, that's pretty short. I went back and I counted, it was 49 words. Oh. So I submitted it, and while I didn't win, there were over 1,500 entries from 27 countries, and I got an honorable mention out of it, so I was pretty excited about that. And I've published 3 books to date. Technically, I've published 2 collections, but then I combine them into a complete collection in a hardbound edition. So that's what I've done so far. And the bulk of my poetry is nature related. I spent my life, pretty much from my teenage years on, I have hiked thousands of miles. In the last 13 years, step back here for a second, I lost my first wife to cancer about 15 years ago, and remarried a couple years later. I call her my new wife now. We've been married for 11 years, and she's from Switzerland. So we go over to Europe about every 3 years, and so and she was an avid hiker also. That's how we met. So in the last 13 years, we've hiked Acadia National Park, the Blue Ridge, the Smokies many times because of the proximity. We've been over and hiked in the Swiss Alps twice, Austrian Alps, the Black Forest in Germany, Sierra Nevada above Tahoe, the Redwoods, most recently the Scottish Highlands, the Isle of Skye. Went out last fall and did Mount Rainier, and this spring we did Sequoia. So, and that doesn't even count all of the local hiking that we do. And for those of you that don't know me closely, we live about an hour and 15 minutes here on the top of Walden Ridge, which is the ridge right before you get to the Cumberland Plateau. It used to be part of the plateau millions of years ago. We're about 1,000 feet above the Tennessee River Valley, and we have 10 acres of wooded land up there, and I've got trails throughout the land, and that's where I do my writing. I have a bench out in the woods, and I sit and write. So that's kind of my history and how I got into poetry, and almost everything is nature related. So the first poem I'm going to read is called The Traveler. And back up for just a second. Back in high school, when we were reading interesting books that our teachers gave us, I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And from that point on, I had a strong interest in the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and their different sects. And so the concept of reincarnation has always fascinated me. So that's this poem called The Traveler. He traipsed a dark and wooded way, and met a man from yesterday. He felt he knew this stranger well, with stories known and yet to tell. I am you, the traveler said, with gentle eyes until the head. From lives long past, your spirit's youth, I've come to help you know the truth. You see, our journey spans all time, to seek the reason and the rhyme. We live each life for wisdom gained, discarding husks when learning wanes. We travel forth, the truth be told, until we know the cosmic whole. With that, the spirit turned and went, the man remained in wonderment. He sat in silence for a while, then rose and passed, the eve beguiled. He smelled the earth, he felt the breeze, and disappeared amongst the trees. So that was my little... Now, most people, when they look at fog, they feel it's gloomy, kind of depressing. It's my favorite time to be out in the woods. I love it. I have an ongoing argument with a buddy of mine who lives up on the mountain. I did call it fog in this particular poem, but really I tell him that we're in the clouds. And he argues with me that it's touching the ground, so it's false. So we go back and forth, and I actually have a follow-up to the poem I'm about to read where I make fun of him, calling it fog. And I did that because Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, is not anything other than him making fun of a British friend of his, a poet, who couldn't make a decision. That's all The Road Not Taken means, is he was making fun of a friend who would never make a decision when he had it, when both choices didn't really matter. So, mountain mist. Not a whisper, nothing stirs on this foggy mountain morn. The trees have donned their ghostly cloak and wear a sight forlorn. But I have come to love the mist and the graceful silhouettes. Though the damp invades my aged bones, my soul has no regrets. I walk my path of autumn leaves, now soggy and crushed down, to find my favorite stone to sit and ponder life's unknowns. Alas, the rain is falling, tapping the forest floor. A bright fire home is calling to warm me to my core. I leave my softened woodland with a promise to return, to converse in lengthy silence with the trees and moss and ferns.
I would just like to comment, there's a wonderful meter and rhythm to that too. It's not just mine.
I also like to occasionally throw a little humor into my poems. We have a wood-burning stove that we use to heat our house the majority of the time. We do have regular backup heating, but we use the wood-burning stove. Sometimes I get all the wood I need, sometimes I'm out in the winter because I didn't finish. So chores undone. I really meant to finish up the few logs I had left. Something must have caught my eye, and now I think I'm effed. It's always so much nicer to split the wood and fall in the beauty of the autumn leaves without the need to thaw. I probably saw a chipmunk or a nuthatch high above. It really doesn't take much to traipse the words I love. So now I'll have to pay the price of my recent indolence and have to finish up my work while I freeze my fundament. So that's my 3 contributions to this, and now Art's going to give you a
forgot
couple
to say
things.
you were a wonderful photographer also.
Oh, yes, I should mention that the majority of the photos that you see, I took. And I tend to come upon a scene and I take the photo, and that's the inspiration for the poem. Rarely does it go the other direction. The Traveler is one where I wrote the poem and did not have a photo, and I went out and paid a fee to use the photo so that I could have that. But most of the photography in my compositions is mine. that?
Say a little bit here about science and poetry, because I spent a long time in science and almost as long in poetry. Strange. Poetry is not quite the same as nature, because science includes nature, but it includes things like high technology, computers, lots of other areas, astrophysics that I don't know about. But science is interesting to me and has always been a part of my life because it touches so many things in the human life. It just touches everything. It's a huge area. And poetry, interesting enough, is much smaller in terms of its total interest by people. You don't find as many poets as you do scientists. But they do overlap, and it's in that overlap where I reside. I'm in a tiny little niche between poetry and science. It's crowded in there. But it's a very small area. Okay, I'm particularly, my poetry seeks, and my science seeks, in fact, to look at the edges of things. I like to see how things fit together, how things cross boundaries, why they cross boundaries. And boundaries happen everywhere, and everything is permeable to some extent. So my interest primarily in poetry had to do with how they relate to science, and science as it relates to poetry. There's a huge number of scientists out there who don't do poetry. In fact, if you give them some poetry to look at, they're not quite sure what to do with it. They don't know. And that's a shame, because it's a huge market. Poetry doesn't have a market. That's a joke. Okay, but let's just say this. I live in that tiny little niche there. How do I get this thing going? You ready? Okay, thank you. I've been in science for 54 years. I've been in poetry for 46 years of those. And it started off as a self-forced start 26 years ago. Because as I was slowly maturing in the science world, I would sit down sometimes for breakfast and read a poem just for the heck of it. And I said, oh, I surely someday I should write some poetry. I should do that. And I woke one morning and I realized I was 40 years old. I hadn't written any poetry. And I had better start now if I was going to do it. So I started on that day. For 365 days in a row, I got up early in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, wrote for 45 minutes, and then went to work. And that happened every single day for 365 days. I was terrible at poetry. I slowly got better. And I'd occasionally submit things out to see whether they were doing well. And it turns out, to make a little brief story here, if you're in science, you're always going to be willing and you have to submit proposals for grants. National Science Foundation is a great place to go, and your luck there is about 25%. Every four proposals you write, you might get one funded, if it's a good proposal. Poetry is much more rare than that. You submit about 50 before you get one published. So poetry is harder to do than science. That's one way to look at it. But the poets that most influenced me initially were T.S. Eliot, William Carlos Williams, Theodore Roethke, Phil Levine, Mary Oliver, and Archie Ammons. And Archie Ammons in particular caught my attention. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with him. He's deceased recently, fairly recently, about 20 years ago. Was at Cornell University, won all kinds of awards for his poetry. And I decided, if he's so famous, I've got to read one of his books. So I got Blair, one of his books, and read through that thing, and I didn't understand it at all. 300 pages, and I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. So I went back and started reading it a second time, very carefully and slowly, and I started to get it. And I realized how he was doing his writing and what he was doing with it, and why it was so good, considered so good. So he was a strong influence on me, and I got kind of wrapped up in his work for several publications, several books worth, in fact, before I finally got past him and got into others. But I've got numerous poems published. I don't know, I can't put a number on, maybe 30 to 40, something like that, here and there. Largely in journals and magazines that are halfway between science and poetry. Chemical and Engineering News, for example, has done a review of 2 of my books. How many of you read Chemical and Engineering News? Not so many. But there are people out there who do. So it's a strange niche audience. And 11 books published today. In fact, this is the recent one, just came out just about a week or 2 ago, called The Diagnosis. And diagnosis has a medical kind of hint to it because of a stethoscope and a pen and a clipboard. But diagnosis is useful more than medicine. So when you take a problem, you kind of dissect it and figure out what the answer is and why. And so this diagnosis pertains to more than just medical issues. So it has a little bit of a medical flavor to it here and there. So I have submitted it to several medical journals for review purposes. New England Journal of Medicine, it's a great journal. If I ever get published in there, I'd be happy. We'll see. We got another 2 or 3 weeks to wait. Okay. Right? Yeah, I think so. I've spent 2 or more years at each of these kind of places. We'll try to hear make it a little easier on me. Two or more years at each of these places. Northern Indiana, that's the Indiana Dunes National Park, which was later converted to a park when we were there before they became a park. Goodyear, Arizona, Flagstaff, Arizona, Hondu, Ghana. As a Peace Corps volunteer, did some teaching of biology there. East Lansing and Kalamazoo, Michigan. I don't recommend those places. The winters there last a long, long time. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, that's a much nicer place. Madill, Oklahoma, that's another place you would not find. You have to look hard to find Madill on a map. But if you look just north of the Red River on Lake Texoma, you'll find a tiny little town, Madill. Don't bother to stop. Lenore City, and I've been in Lenore City about 32 years and expect to be there for a while longer. No important moves there. We'll save room for questions and answers here in a bit. I would like to read one of my poems. This is one that was published just recently in this new book. And to make it, I guess, easier here, you can read it. I'll read it from the book. A shrew, having died, lives. This morning, on the cold concrete floor of the garage, a shrew, its tiny life snapped out by a cat sometime in the night. Its body is stiff and dry, no bigger than a small turd the size of my little finger, but still, it's lost in every place in the universe. So I'm trying in this case to use a series of pretty strong contrast between morning, cold, concrete floor, garage, very, very harsh places, times a day. And then bring it, insult the little creature, I guess, calling it a small turd, half the size of my little finger, but all other diminutive kind of things. And then it's really important anyhow. Everything has a place in the universe. So, that's an example of one. You can diagnose that all you like. And I'd like to do one more. This one is taken from the Hallelujah series and other poems. And in 2017, there was a total eclipse that happened, went through, in fact, it was visible in Tennessee, in Sweetwater, where my daughter lives, which is very close to us. So, in this poem, I'm just trying to put out a series of sensory kind of thing, and kind of feel good. It's not a harsh little message or anything like that. Just a little feel good poem about that eclipse event. On the special day, we went out early to see the eclipse, to be with friends, and we ate hot dogs and chips and watermelon, a few things like that, before driving the truck to the upper end of the pasture, along the tree-encrusted edge of where we would hang out in shade while the sun was still there. And the wife and her boys and her ex chatted loudly and laughed and got busy, setting up cameras with special lenses on tripods, and I, of course, tested the pinhole thing made from cardboard and aluminum foil. And it worked out fine, but things in the cluster became too loud for me. I just wanted to soak it all in. The soft noises of the birds, the insects, the far off stamp of a horse hoof in the barn, the small breeze rising, a slow hill beginning to stir a degree or two cooler now from beneath the trees, several butterflies bobbing more or less south along the edge of the fresh smooth pasture grass. I just wanted to take it all in. I just wanted to feel the slow before. I just want this to anticipate in quiet, the abrupt, rare moment is the light, pleasant and good strange. One interesting thing about this poem, other than its length, not 25 pages even, is that that's all one long sentence. So there's continuity here. Okay. Sure, if we have any minutes left, I'm not sure about that.
We're running a little late, but if there's a question,
Okay, if there's questions, we'll take it.
please take it.
Later.
I have a question. I'm currently publishing the second volume of my late mother's poetry, and I'm going through a lot with that, as we have Sue. And her series is the Poetry and Prose of Emily Evans. When do you think poetry becomes prose? Where's that line?
I think it's when the author decides that.
Well, is it, I mean, if someone's just writing and then someone else is reading it, you know, the free verse, you know, when does it become more narrative poetry? It's really, I don't really expect there to be a hard answer to it, but it's something I was glad I named it the Poetry and Prose of Emily Evans, because I'm not sure where the line is.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because I struggle with that, and my collections, I titled Poems and Other Musings.
I noticed that and I thought of it, that's what made me think of it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, because there are times where when I was writing something, I'm like, really, this doesn't feel like poetry to me. So I think to Art's point, it really is the author's decision as to whether they call it poetry or prose. Hmm?
I actually have a definite answer.
Oh, sure, let's hear it.
Oh, good.
Every once in a while, I did the header button twice.
Well, they said it was
It
fun.
creates a line.
Oh.
Line.
That's pretty funny.
Oh, I just had two quick comments. First of all, I know, David, I've read both of your books, but you reading it adds a whole nother layer. And I don't know if that's with everybody else, but if I pick up a book and read poetry, I hear my voice. I don't want to hear my voice. But when I heard you two reading, it's like, it's a whole different layer that a lot of people don't see. Now,
I actually have a CD
yeah.
of Robert Frost reading his poetry, and it is amazing because it is in the poet's voice. That's why I hope to get out and do some readings around the community, because really when you hear the cadence that the poet has, where they put the emphasis, you try to do that, you know, with punctuation, but you don't know if the reader's actually hitting those pauses like you want, or those stresses where you want, and so yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Have you thought of audiobooks, or I just wonder if poets do that because their audience would rather?
Yeah, I've thought about doing it. Actually, we talked briefly about having some assistance to maybe do an audio version of one of the books and put it up and just see how it did. Yeah.
I would not do that with my own voice. I hate my own voice. The last poetry reading I gave official as a poetry reading was probably 20 years ago. I just don't like to hear myself.
But to have somebody, if you found somebody who had the cadence that you thought, that sounds.
If I could get a good reader to do that, that'd be great.
The other thing I do want to mention is, and I've always learned, everybody, no matter what you write, should study poetry and try and write it, because you learn the economy of words.
Yes,
you don't
absolutely.
realize how many words you're using in your narrative that you don't need, or how much is in your dialogue that you don't need. And you only realize that when you start writing and studying poetry.
Mhm.
Is what you need.
I know somebody in Nigeria.